Okay, so I'm here to talk to you about the process of how to maximize your space for its own benefit, for the community's benefit, however you define community. And this slide is just important because you can see on the left axis, I've got degrees of legal commitment from lowest to greatest. Even though a sale will free you from legal commitment, it will sort of give all of the rights of your property to someone else. So that's why it's the greatest legal commitment. And on the bottom axis, you have financial commitment and risk. And this could be your financial commitment and risk, or that of the owner, the developer. The structure of the transaction will determine who bears that, who has responsibility for that commitment and bears that risk. Okay, so there's a longer presentation with applications on steps to space maximization, but we're going to go through it very quickly now. The first is to decide action is required. You would be amazed how many organizations cannot get to or past this step, or they decide action is required, but then paralysis sets in, analysis paralysis, as it were. But keep going down. If you decide action is required, keep going down the steps to maximize. You can always go back and revise. So the second step is to gather your documents and implement reconnaissance. We'll explain all these in more detail very briefly going forward. After you know what you have, your documentation, you're going to assemble your team. You're going to have an internal team. This is your board members and or other leadership that can be helpful. And then you'll have an external team, your consultants. We'll talk about that in a second. Then once you've decided action is necessary, gathered your documents, assembled your team, then together you're going to evaluate. You're going to evaluate your internal and external needs, desires, and values. And then you're also going to evaluate your internal and external supports and opportunities. You're going to put that all together to say, okay, what do we want to do? Number 5 is a long way of saying, what do we want to do and how are we going to do it? And then you need to approve your process. And there'll be internal and external approvals, and then you're going to implement your plan. Now, I should say this is really just the beginning of your trilogy, because then once you implement your plan, depending on what you're doing, there may be a construction period, there may be an operation period, but we don't have time to go into that in 10 minutes. So these are, in short, your steps to space maximization. So deciding action is required. I just want to underline the point here, how valuable congregations are to their communities. Their communities, obviously their congregation, but their communities writ large. And this is something called the HALO study. Partners for Sacred Places and University of Pennsylvania put it together. Judson Memorial Church, Donna's church, and others have gone through this process, and you can see that the value to the community is, tens of or almost $10 million a year. Won't be the same in every community. I think the average in Pennsylvania was somewhere between 1 and 2 million. That's still a lot of scratch to the community in actual economic activity and services they provide where the government doesn't have to. But at the same time, these great resources doing these great things for the communities, we can see many houses of worship are being lost, right? And these are some old headlines, but they continue to persist. Struggling to survive, congregations look to sell. 18 shuttered Catholic churches, right? We want to stop this. And whether or not it's appropriate to sell, that's an internal decision. But what Bricks and Mortals is designed to do is make sure that every faith-based organization has all the information and all of the connections to make the best decision with sufficient amount of time to implement that decision that is best for itself and its community, however it defines its community. Gathering documents, pretty self-explanatory. These are just some examples of your corporate documents, certificate of incorporation, bylaws, constitution, and then some surveys of a site. The third step, as I said, is assemble your team. This is one of my favorite graphics. Those that have seen this presentation before will know, but it really does take many super friends to make one of these projects come to fruition. Less so if it's going to be less extreme undertaking such as a license or a lease, right? You may just need an attorney and some internal leadership, but if it's going to be a full-scale redevelopment or new development, you're going to require more assistance. So your internal team, when you're thinking about who your internal team is, they're going to review your corporate documents. You need to review your corporate documents to determine who has the legal authority to make decisions over your real property. And then you should identify an individual or a small committee to work with your external team, which we'll talk about in a second, to coordinate the process and report to the board and congregation about what you're doing with your property. And as has been stated, I suggest that you have a committee that looks at the totality of your property and its use, not just saying, oh, we should start having licenses for quinceañeras or those sorts of things. I think you should look to really maximize your space for income, mission, and your purposes. And then third, that committee or individual should have knowledge of your organization's history, operation, and desires, right? Where is it going in the future? Should have respect of others, so when they speak, their words will carry weight, be heard, respected, and appreciated, but there should be a dialogue. They should have comfort with a leadership role, right? There's going to be a fair amount of responsibility here. And then they should plan to be with the faith-based organization for the foreseeable future. I can't tell you how critical this is. I've been in a couple projects where the pastor's parting gift has been to try to get a real estate development deal in the works, and that, forgive me, is not usually a recipe for success. It's an artificial timeline, and then someone to carry on or remember what is to occur is no longer there. So if you're going to do it as part of a pastor leaving, that's fine, but there really needs to be leadership that's going to persist on, that's going to take a leadership role. So your external team, there are several consultants that you may need, but just quickly, you will likely need an attorney and an architect, right? And in short, your attorney will help you understand what you own, how you own it, what approvals you need, internal and external, to use it, if any, how you make corporate decisions, and then we'll create the legal agreements and structures to address the risks and achieve the goals that you have. And as you've seen in Taylor's presentation, architects will help you understand your property's potential, how you can maximize that potential, evaluate your own space needs, and design and review plans for existing and new space. And both of these consultants will help you with lots more. I'll be very quick on this. So evaluating your internal and external needs, right? Your needs internal are, in short, going to be some balance of mission and income. What are we trying to achieve in terms of our acts, and how much money do we really need to make sure that we can keep the lights on, keep the roof from leaking, keep the boiler, and in very few cases, the air conditioning running. And then externally, what are the needs? In New York City, we know housing and homelessness is a huge issue. Hunger is a huge issue. Supporting arts, especially burgeoning arts, is essential, as is education. And there are any number that we can continue going on. These are just some examples. Please don't hold it against me. And then what's the value of your property? So internal, it has a value to you. You've been in that space for a period of time, and it provides space perhaps that you could not purchase at any dollar amount in the configuration, the size of it, the location. So it's important to know how you value it. And then there's the external valuation, right? How does the market value it? And an appraiser or a broker will give you a market opinion of value. And then there's something called asset mapping, where you bring in external stakeholders in your community, elected officials, other large not-for-profits and institutions to figure out, and could be small, but just stakeholders in the community to figure out how to maximize your space, and really you're valuing your space through the eyes of the community. So what's the value of your space to the community that way? Then you want to evaluate your opportunities and partners. I won't go through this whole list, but you can see it here, right? I feel like I could sing it. You are not alone. There are lenders, there are grantors, there are other partners, whether they be a tenant, a joint venture partner, and then there are grants where a secular not-for-profit could be of assistance in leveraging grants. This is really, again, this is just a 101. We could spend time on each of when and how you would use these partners. We won't go into it now. please follow up with Kate and the team after. If there are particular subjects that'll be helpful to you after this, we can certainly do another training. Defining your compass points, as we said, we're going to do this with your team. Our standard, gold standard, if you're going to do development, is number 3, a request for proposal. But if you're doing a lease or a straight sale, or even a ground lease, particularly in high value areas like Manhattan and Brooklyn that have a high market rate value, broker can be super helpful, and they'll help you identifying what the value is and taking it to market through these strategies will help you establish your compass points. At the same time, you will put your compass points in and bring them to market using these mechanisms. This is just an example of requests for proposals that we've issued for multiple sites for development. Very quickly, St. Edmunds was a full-scale redevelopment of the site. St. Peter's Episcopal Church is redevelopment of part of its site, and then Shiloh Baptist Church was in partnership with LISC. The one thing that you should know, and I won't go into depth here, is that any lease in excess of 5 years or longer, a sale of your property, or a mortgage of your property is going to require approvals. Most, if you are not a mainline Protestant organization, it will be a Attorney General approval. If you're mainline Protestant, you likely will have adjudicatory that will have to approve and then go to the court. This is the last point, just an example of implementation. On your right, you'll see St. Stephen, St. Martin's Church, and on the left, you will see a big hole. So St. Stephen, St. Martin's Church, much to their credit and their faith, raised some money and 3 times tried to pour a foundation over the course of, I would say, about 10 years. And then they realized that this process is just not working. They got taken advantage of by their contractor, and so they really looked for a development partner with which to work. This stick-built church on your right was about 100 years old and was not in good condition. They took it to market and engaged in a sort of a mini request for proposal, and then these are the plans. You'll see sort of flipping the lot around, and now the church is placed on the corner, and then they contemplated in the design residences on 2/3 of the lot. You can see that plan. This is what the rendering looked like in 3 dimensions. So they kept 1/3, and they got a fully paid for completed sanctuary with parish hall in the basement, state of the art, very beautiful. And that's it in reality. So it's really amazing to see these things come to fruition. And it's because they had a lot of planning, and Father Donaldson, I'm sure, will chew your ear off about the congregational management side of doing something like that. My last point is costs here. So, right, in my first slide, there are legal risks and costs. No matter what you do, even if it's small, you are likely to have some cost for outside consultants, whether they be architects or attorneys or owners reps or others. The more work that here's a sort of strategy to manage cost. The more work you do, the less work your external team is going to have to do, particularly if you're paying hourly, right? That is a smart strategy. You do the legwork for them, make it easy for them so that they can provide you the guidance you need. Most consultants will provide you an initial consultation for free, so take advantage of that. And make sure you know when you are on the clock and you're starting to pay, or when you're still in the free consultation phase. I myself want to make sure that there's a clear scope, or at least what the plan is to get a clear scope if one cannot be arrived at quickly before I'm engaged. Many consultants will work with you on payment, so that means perhaps a smaller payment now and then having payment due on milestones, or deferring some of the payment until there's some sort of cash event, some transaction. And then there are resources available to help pay for pre-development work, and I think that that'll be touched on later. That's it, my disclaimer. I'm an attorney, which means none of this is legal advice. It's just educational. I hope it was educational. If we can be of any assistance, please let us know.